You're nothing but a charity case in a paramedic's uniform, and that mechanic husband of yours can't even afford a decent tie." My mother's words landed flat across the dinner table, her eyes crawling over my EHS jacket like it was something she'd scraped off her shoe. She reached over, snatched the embossed invitation right out of my hands, and dropped it onto her side plate, dragging her fork through the gravy until the ink bled into a gray smear. "Camille is marrying into the Whitmore family. Tomorrow, half of Bay Street will be there." Her chin lifted toward the chandelier. "I will not have people see that the Whitmore bride has a sister who drives an ambulance for $41 an hour. Stay home. Don't embarrass us." I sat there with my jaw locked so tight I could feel my back teeth grinding. The cut from my own mother went in deeper than anything I'd pulled out of a car wreck on the 401. I folded my napkin, set it beside my plate, took my husband's calloused hand under the table, and we left. I accepted the exile without a single word, but she had no idea. 3 hours after that $2 million wedding at the Royal York, 8 officers from the Ontario Securities Commission walked into the reception with a court order. The lead investigator stepped up to the head table and said one sentence that changed everything. "Mrs. Whitfield, we need to speak with you about the Callaway Trust." But before I tell you what that sentence meant, I need you to understand that night was the only night in my life I watched my mother's polished mask crack down the middle in front of 300 people she'd spent decades trying to impress. If you want to know who paid for it, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and stay with me. Because what happened next, nobody at that wedding saw coming, not even me. Let me take you back to where this actually started. That morning, my mother had laid out a guest list thick as a phone book across her kitchen island, the one with the marble that cost more than my first car. Her nails, done that morning in a shade called Bordeaux Power, traced down a column of names I recognized from the business section of the Globe and Mail. Her eyes landed on my paramedic jacket hanging on the back of my chair, and her nose wrinkled like she'd caught a whiff of the call I'd been on at 4 that morning. Without warning, she reached across and pulled the gold-foiled invitation right out of my hand. It slid off the table and landed face down on her Persian runner. I didn't reach for it. I'd learned a long time ago that reaching only gave her something to step on. I breathed in for 4 seconds, held it, let it out for 4. The combat reflex of 14 years on a stretcher kicked in before the hurt could. My eyes slid sideways to the love seat, where my older sister Camille sat filing her nails into perfect ovals, not even glancing up. That small smile at the corner of her mouth was as good as a signature. Beside me, my husband Theo sat with his hands flat on his knees, hands stained at the knuckles with engine grease, no amount of scrubbing ever fully lifted. The same hands that had pulled 3 teenagers out of a flipped pickup on Highway 7 the week before. He didn't move, didn't say a word. The muscle in his jaw worked like he was chewing glass. My mother wasn't finished. She jabbed a finger, heavy with the ring my late father had given her, at the small pin on my jacket collar. 14 years of service, a little brass maple leaf I'd earned the hard way. "Your sister starved herself into a size 2 to land a man like Graham. Don't you dare wear your little ambulance badge to his family's wedding like it means something." Every word was a blade aimed at the one thing she couldn't stand knowing, that the overtime money I'd wired home 2 winters ago, back when she swore the heating bill would put us in the street, had gone straight into Camille's first Birkin, the bag she used as bait. I stood, snapped the top button of my coat back into place, looked my mother dead in the eye and used the flattest voice I owned, the one I reserved for telling families their loved one wasn't coming home. "You're right, Mom. My EHS badge and the burn scar on Theo's forearm are worth more than every invitation in this house. Congratulations." I took Theo's hand. We walked out. The door clicked shut behind us, a small, final sound that ended every illusion I'd ever had about that house being mine. Theo didn't say anything until we were in the driveway. He opened my door, waited, walked around, got in, started the truck. The engine turned over twice before it caught, the way it always did in February. "You good?" 2 words. That was Theo's whole vocabulary when it mattered most. I didn't answer right away. I was looking at his hands on the wheel, the scar tissue across the left one, pale and shiny, from the garage fire 2 years back when a fuel line let go while he had his arm under a customer's Civic. He'd dragged the kid working under the next hoist out by the collar before the extinguisher even reached them, came back for his own burns after. 11 stitches, 4 days off, and he was back turning wrenches before the bandages came off clean. He never told the shop owner it happened trying to save someone else. Those scarred hands were worth more than every Bay Street cufflink that would be in that ballroom tomorrow. The truck rattled down the road and a memory hit me sideways, the way they do when you least expect it. 16 years old, standing in that same kitchen holding an acceptance letter to the paramedic program at Humber. Full scholarship. My mother took it out of my hands and fed it page by page into the gas fireplace. "Camille just borrowed $8,000 for pageant photos," she said, not even looking at me. "You're working at the diner to pay it back." Then she pressed her finger into my forehead, hard, right between my eyes. "You've got your father's eyes. I won't let his nothing infect this family." My father, Walter, had been a millwright at the GM plant in Oshawa for 22 years. He came home every night smelling like machine oil, picked me up onto his workbench in the garage, and let me hold the level while he checked his cuts twice before he ever made one. He taught me that a thing built right doesn't need to announce itself. He died when I was 9, a press malfunction on the line, gone before the ambulance, the same kind of truck I'd eventually drive, even cleared the gate. He left me one thing, a little ring whittled from a scrap of black walnut from the shop floor, sanded down with 400 grit until it shone. I'd kept it in my breast pocket through every double shift, every code blue, every call where I drove home afterward and sat in the driveway for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. My mother had every photo of him gone within a month of the funeral, replaced with a story about us being descended from some minor English gentry. A lie she'd spent 2 decades polishing for an audience that, as it turned out, never asked. That night I was 16. I packed 2 bags and took the go bus to my aunt's place in Scarborough. The intake counselor at the program didn't ask many questions when I came in 2 years later, with red eyes and an acceptance letter held together with tape. The cruelty repeated itself at my own wedding 4 years back. Theo stood at the front in his coveralls, cleaned up as much as coveralls can be cleaned up, with 8 guys from the shop in the second row, still smelling faintly of brake cleaner, grinning like idiots. No string quartet, no ice sculpture. My mother sat in the front row dabbing at dry eyes, and I heard her mutter to my aunt, loud enough for me to catch it on the wind, "She married a man who fixes other people's cars for a living. She's dragging this whole family into a garage." She'd shown up at our apartment the month before, run a finger along the windowsill like a building inspector, and told Theo, in front of me, that marrying her daughter was the only thing he'd ever owned that was worth more than him. Theo said nothing. He picked his keys up off the counter and went back to the shop for a double. The chip in the drywall by the door, from where his fist had landed later that night after I'd gone to bed, told me the rest. It never really stopped. Last spring, during a 16-hour shift covering for a coworker whose mother had passed, my phone buzzed between calls. Not "Are you okay?" Not "How's the overtime treating you?" My mother's voice, clipped and urgent. She needed me to co-sign a line of credit so Camille could put a down payment on a condo to match Graham's address. When I said no, she called me selfish, said I'd always resented my sister, and hung up before I could finish the sentence. Back in the truck that morning of the second invitation snatching, I looked at Theo's scarred hand on the wheel, the gas gauge sitting near empty, and I rolled my father's little ring between my fingers in my pocket. I made myself a promise in the quiet of that cab. Not one more tear for people who only loved me when it cost them nothing. Not one. What my mother never knew, what nobody in that house ever found out, was what happened 11 months earlier on a stretch of regional road outside Sudbury. I was off duty, driving back from a continuing education course, when I came up on a multi-vehicle pileup in whiteout conditions. A delivery van had jackknifed across both lanes, and a sedan had gone underneath the trailer of the van that hit it. The first responders weren't even close yet, the roads were that bad. I pulled over, grabbed my jump bag out of habit, and ran toward a car that was already starting to smoke near the engine block. Standard protocol says you wait for fire suppression. Standard protocol also says you don't crawl into a vehicle that's leaking fuel onto hot metal. I did it anyway. There was a man in the back seat, an older man, conscious but pinned, blood running into his eye from a gash at his hairline, his hand pressed flat against the window glass, fingers spread, the way people press against glass when they're trying to remind their own body that it's still there. I broke the window with the base of a flashlight, got the door wedged enough to drag him out by the shoulders of his coat as the smoke thickened behind us. We were maybe 20 feet away when the engine caught properly and the heat rolled over both of us as I covered him with my body on the gravel shoulder. A piece of trim off the car caught me across the back of the shoulder, opened a 4-inch cut. I didn't notice until the paramedics on scene, my own colleagues, pointed it out an hour later. I held pressure on his neck wound with my bare hand for almost 40 minutes until the actual ambulance could get through the snow. 2 days after, a man in a gray suit came to my door with a card and asked if I'd be willing to meet someone. I said no politely and went back inside. I never found out the man's full story until much later, through a letter forwarded by my service, that the older man I'd pulled out of that car was Reginald Ashworth, founder of one of the largest private wealth management firms in the country, the same firm, as it turned out, that quietly oversaw a good chunk of the money behind half the families on my mother's guest list, including, though I didn't know it yet, the Whitmore family Camille was marrying into. I never told anyone. I asked the service to keep the report routine, no media, no recognition ceremony I didn't want to stand through. The morning of Camille's wedding, while 400 guests gathered at the Royal York under crystal chandeliers, I drove the other direction, out to the Pine Hills Cemetery to visit my father's grave. I walked the rows slowly, past the modest stones, the ones that don't come with a net worth attached. I stopped at my father's, brushed the snow off the granite, and pressed 2 fingers to his name. Cold and permanent, the way real things are. Behind me, a familiar shuffle of boots on gravel. My old training officer, Harold Beecham, 71 now, retired EHS, a man who'd taught half the paramedics in this region how to hold their composure on the worst night of someone else's life. He'd been visiting his own late wife's plot 2 rows over for 15 years every Sunday, snow or shine. "Your shoulders are doing the thing again," he said, not looking at me, eyes on the flag at the cemetery gate. "Ambushed, Harold. By my own mother." He grunted, reached up, and unclipped the old service pin from his coat, the one his late partner had carried for 30 years, and pressed it into my palm. Cold metal. "That's the weight of doing the job for the right reasons. Your mother's never lifted anything that heavy in her life." He thumped his fist once against my chest. "Stand up straight. You didn't do anything wrong." I straightened my spine and walked out of that cemetery like I meant it. By 3 that afternoon, our small house on the East End was dead quiet. The television was tuned to a local lifestyle segment doing a live cut-in from the wedding, drone shots sweeping over the Royal York's gold ballroom. Camille floated across the frame in a dress someone on air called Custom Vera Wang hand-beaded. My mother orbited the head table, refilling wine for men whose names showed up in the report on business. I sat at our kitchen table with my jump bag laid open, restocking it piece by piece, the dry click of supplies against the table cutting under the string quartet on the screen. 2 completely different worlds happening at the same hour. Champagne flutes catching chandelier light on one side, a dripping kitchen faucet and the smell of Theo's coveralls hanging by the door on the other. A hard knock at the door. Theo, still in his shop pants from a job that morning, opened it. A driver in a black cap dropped a white insulated box on our step without a word and left. Theo carried it in, read the card taped to the lid out loud in a voice gone flat. "Leftover lobster from the head table. Figured your husband should know what real food tastes like for once. Stay home next time." My mother's signature slashed underneath in red pen. Theo looked at it for 3 seconds, then walked it out to the bin in the yard and dropped the lid shut like a gavel. He came back in, sat down, and helped me zip the bag without saying a word. There was nothing left to say. We sat like that for 20 minutes. Then the TV signal cut to static, and at the exact same second, a low rumble moved through the floor. Multiple vehicles outside, engines too heavy for our street. Theo crossed to the window in 2 steps and went pale. "Sage." His voice dropped to the register he only used at scenes that scared him. "I don't think this is a noise complaint." I stepped onto the porch. 2 unmarked gray sedans and an SUV with provincial government plates had pulled up across our driveway, boxing it in. 6 investigators in plain dark suits stepped out together, the kind of coordinated movement that doesn't come from a parking enforcement unit. The lead one, a woman with short gray hair and a folder under her arm, walked straight to the porch steps. "Sage Whitfield?" Her voice left no room to negotiate. "That's me." I kept my hands loose at my sides, breathing even, 4 and 4. "The training doesn't care whether you're at a car wreck or your own front porch. We're with the Ontario Securities Commission. We need a statement from you regarding the Calloway Family Trust and a man named Reginald Ashworth." She held up identification. The timing wasn't lost on me. My mother's biggest day, my mother's biggest secret, surfacing on the exact same afternoon. That wasn't coincidence. That was a thread finally pulling itself loose. "Give me 5 minutes," I said, and went inside to change out of my off-duty clothes into the one good blazer I owned, the navy one I wore to court testimonies. When I came back out, I wasn't the daughter who'd been told to stay home that morning. I was a witness who'd just been handed the one piece of leverage nobody in that ballroom knew existed. I rode in the back of the lead vehicle. 40 minutes later, we turned onto the long drive of the Royal York's private event entrance, where valets in white jackets scattered as the cars rolled past the red carpet laid out for guests, straight up to the front steps. A server dropped a full tray of champagne, the crash of glass cutting clean through the string quartet on the terrace. 300 heads turned at once. I stepped out behind the investigators, heels on marble, every eye in that room recalculating who I was. I found my mother's table fast. Her face had gone the color of wet plaster. The wine glass in her hand slipped and shattered on the floor. Camille sat frozen, the beading on her dress catching the light unevenly as her shoulders started to shake. Graham, the groom, stood half out of his chair, sweat already darkening his collar. The crowd parted, and an older man with a cane and a thin scar above his eyebrow walked through the gap toward me. Reginald Ashworth. He dropped the cane, took both my hands in his, and his voice carried clean across the whole room. "Sage Vasquez, Whitfield, this firm owes you more than money could ever cover. I owe you my life." 300 people went dead silent. The investigators moved my mother, Camille, and Graham into a private room off the ballroom. I went in too. Ashworth followed, planted his cane on the hardwood, and turned on my mother with a voice gone hard as a closed bank vault. You told this family's wealth office that your other daughter was unavailable, that she'd cut ties with this family by choice. You knew exactly who pulled me out of that car 11 months ago, and you let me find out from a court order instead of from you. My mother's composure cracked down the seams. I was protecting the family's image, that's all, I didn't. You mortgaged this family's house to a private lender at 22% to fund your other daughter's wardrobe and her down payment. Ashworth said, cutting through her. And you used trust documents with forged co-signature lines to do it. The room went absolutely still. He turned to Graham. Did you know your wife's family financed this entire image on borrowed money and a sister's combat pay, in a manner of speaking? Graham turned slowly toward Camille. It wasn't anger on his face. It was the look of a man realizing he'd married a stranger. Ashworth straightened, extended his arm toward me like he was presenting evidence to a jury. 11 months ago, my car went off the road outside Sudbury in a whiteout. My driver and security detail were both unconscious. This woman, off-duty, alone, pulled me out of a burning vehicle and held pressure on a neck wound for 40 minutes in the snow until help arrived. She refused a reward. She asked that her name never be released. I only learned who she was when the OSAC cross-referenced her name against the same fraudulent paperwork that was used to bankroll today's wedding. He let that settle over the room. Graham sat down hard in a chair and put his head in his hands. Camille opened her mouth, managed half a word, and nothing else came out. She looked at our mother. Our mother looked at the floor. Neither of them had anything left to say. Ashworth walked back into the ballroom, took the microphone from the stunned bandleader, and let his voice carry to every corner of the room. Bay Street can put a price on almost anything. It cannot buy what this woman did 11 months ago, and it never will. 300 people rose to their feet. The applause hit like a wave, rattling the glassware on every table. I stood there, hands at my sides, and didn't smile. I let it wash over my mother and sister like the tide finally going out on a lie they'd spent a lifetime building. I slipped out onto the hotel's terrace afterward, away from the handshakes. The lake was just visible past the skyline, catching the last of the light. Behind me, the slow, uneven click of heels. My mother. Mascara tracked down both cheeks. Sage, I was wrong. Please, talk to Ashworth's people. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. We're going to lose the house. I didn't turn around. Camille came next, grabbing my sleeve, words spilling out in a rush. I told Graham I was the one helping you out financially, that I was bankrolling your career because I felt bad for you. If he finds out the truth, that it was the other way around, he'll leave me. There it was, the last mask, off on its own. She hadn't just taken my money. She'd taken my story and worn it like a costume. I pulled my sleeve free. You're not crying because you feel bad for what you did. You're crying because your money's on fire. I let that sit. I forgive you both as family. But the trust died the day you ground your heel into my invitation. I turned and walked back inside, leaving them at the railing. That night, I declined Ashworth's offer of a private dinner, took a cab home, and walked into our small kitchen where Theo was standing in his undershirt with a smear of grease still on his forearm from the job he'd squeezed in that afternoon. He saw me in the blazer, medals of nothing on it, no medals, no fanfare, and the corner of his mouth lifted just slightly. He opened his arms, and I crossed the kitchen in 3 steps. His shirt smelled like the shop, like metal and rubber, nothing borrowed, nothing for show, just 2 arms that had been steady through every single thing that had tried to knock me down since I was 16 years old. Standing there with a dripping faucet and a half-functioning dishwasher, I was the richest person in that entire province. The aftermath wrote itself in legal letters. Graham's lawyers filed for an annulment within the month, citing fraudulent financial disclosure. The prenup Camille had signed without reading the asset protection clause on page 14 triggered the moment the OSC findings became public record. She walked away with nothing. Not the condo, not the car, not a single line of credit. My mother's house went into receivership before the next mortgage payment came due, the private loan she'd taken finally calling itself in. There was no one left for her to lean on. The daughter who always answered, who always sent money, who always absorbed the hit, that line was closed. She left long voicemails most Sundays, soaked in apology and scripture. I let them go to voicemail. I never called back. Theo handed me a coffee one morning a few weeks later, black, in the mug with the chip on the rim, and we sat at that same kitchen table where I'd packed my jump bag the day everything broke open. No string quartet, no drone shots, just 2 people who'd earned the quiet sitting between us. The strongest person in any room isn't the one with the largest line of credit, sitting in judgment of everyone underneath her. It's the one who keeps her spine straight even when the wound came from her own blood. I cut every name I needed to off that list with my own hand, and I have never once looked back to check if it was the right call. It was.